We're here to talk with our guests about their expertise in using content and media and technology to drive business online. And we also check in on their rock and roll experience. I'm here with Tom Dempsey and Sarah Noonan. Welcome, Tom and Sarah.
All right. Good to be here as always, Keith.
Hi, Keith.
And let's get you on the screen. So we got a great show, continuing in our tradition of going global. Our guest is from Egypt, dialing in from Cairo today. He's a writer and content strategist, really cool guy I met networking. And we are using SMarketPlace to talk about Publio Studio and how we record and turn these recordings into a month's worth of content with a half-hour interview. So we look forward to showing you all. Tom, tell us about what's going on in your life.
we don't have enough time. No, I'm happy to be here, Keith. As always, cheers to you. In the morning we'll cheers with coffee. After the pod, then we'll do bourbon.
There you go.
No, market share growth experts, and good to see you. Can't wait for today. We've got a great guest.
Yeah, absolutely. And Sarah, welcome. I know you got a lot going on. We have worked with you to launch your new business, as well as all the work you do with us as producer and consultant. So welcome.
Thanks, Keith. Yeah, I just came from a networking event hosted by the Women's Business Development Council in Connecticut, who gave me the grant to launch my business. So it was great to be there and, be there as a business owner for the first time.
Well, we've worked with them too, and it's really been a great experience. So without further ado, let's bring on our guest, Ibrahim. Welcome.
Hey, thank you for hosting me today. I'm glad to be here.
So we were just commenting on our theme of going global. Welcome to you from Cairo. I'm in Arizona. Tom's in Colorado, and Heather is in Connecticut. So we're beaming in from all over today.
Absolutely. And I mean, right now in Cairo, I think it's like 8 p.m., but trust me, Cairo's still super lively. It's a nocturnal city to the max.
Well, that must have some connection to the latter part of our show, if it's a nightlife city.
Absolutely, it is. Absolutely is.
Well, so welcome. You and I met. You are just a deep dive expert on content. And we're not going to just talk about your writing and editing, but really the context in which you write, I think, is fascinating. We've been chatting about that a little bit. But tell us about yourself, what you're doing and how you got here.
So right now I work in content marketing, starting my own agency, my own business in New York. And the way I got here was not a straight line whatsoever. I actually started off as a civil engineer. I started off in a very different space. But what happened was I didn't enjoy it because I felt it was very dry. I didn't interact with people. I'm an extrovert. I wanted something more. So I got from sort of civil engineering into business consulting. And I think it was just a simple progression to marketing. And I'm a big fan of communication in general. So for me, this was something that I was really glad to sort of fall into. And I think that's the thing, right? Like for me, content marketing straddles that line. On the one hand, you have to be very meticulous. It requires a lot of attention to detail. You have to really go through the works, but you're very communicative on the other hand. You have to sort of be very empathetic, and you have to think about what other people are going through. So I think it just caters to both parts in me that really loves details, but still enjoys that communicative aspect.
Listening to you, it makes the connection that content marketing is a bit of engineering in and of itself, right? You have to have that communication side, but as we're going to talk about today, you're putting a puzzle together with how that communication supports the function.
1,010%. I think for me, that puzzle analogy is part of the enjoyment. And I think part of what I really enjoy is rather than just trying to figure out what piece you're going to write on the fly, what's more enjoyable is like, what are all the pieces we're going to be working on? Like, what's the content plan or what's the content calendar for the next quarter? And the reason, once you have that sort of all thing laid out in front of you, it just gives you so much versatility. So you can, like, take for instance this this interview we're having or this podcast. What happens is you can take it and tailor it and redistribute it in so many ways, and all from, let's say, half an hour of an interview. Same concept. If I have, let's say, a ton of interviews, I could maybe have an ebook printed out of them, right? Like, distill the best advice from everybody who came with me. So the more planning that goes into the content, the more distribution opportunities appear, the more you're able to really highlight the brand's not just worth, but like thought leadership, so to speak. So yeah, that puzzle analogy is beautiful.
You also come from an engineering background, as you mentioned. What I saw that you wrote was that because of that, you approach issues, problems, projects, anything with the first question of what are the fundamentals at play? What are those fundamentals? Are they different than what you mentioned?
I think for me, when I think of fundamentals, these are like the primitives. These are things that anybody would agree on, right? So for instance, when you're talking about your product, and this is maybe one of the things that I find a lot of marketing teams fall on, right? For instance, if you were to ask a company, what's the value proposition? What makes you different from the competition? These are things that people rarely align on. And for me, when they don't align on, it's like, you guys have a significant messaging problem that you need to address before we start doing a content strategy, because you're not aligned on what message you're trying to hammer to your customers. So I think when I think of first principles, I'm thinking of those are like the non-negotiables, like the building blocks. So for instance, the buyer's journey consists of, let's say, 1, 2, 3, 4 phases, whatever model you use, but you're aware that the buyer's journey is always going to taper down like this, because not everybody has the same problem, and those who have the problem are not going to be interested in your solution, and those who are going to be interested in your solution might be turned off by the price or anything else. That is a fundamental, that idea of a funnel. You could sort of maybe think of it as a flywheel. You could think of it in any other way. You could reshape it. But at the end of the day, the idea still stands that there are phases, and each phase is different in the sense of the concerns are different, the considerations are different, and the messaging that should be directed to the customer at that stage is different. Another fundamental is customers have different motivations, and you need to understand their motivation to buy your product or service. So for instance, one of my favorite tools is something called the limbic map. The limbic map is basically this oval-shaped chart, and you're going to find 3 main emotions lying on it, right? So you have care, you have dominance, and you have enjoyment. And any product in the world will exist somewhere on that chart, right? So for instance, when I'm buying Nike, I'm buying something because I want to be here in the dominant side. Whereas if I'm buying, let's say, medicine, and it's in the care side. When I'm buying Netflix, it's in the enjoyment side. And understanding where your customer lies there and their motivation also should dictate that. So I guess that's what I mean by fundamentals, is like understanding the building blocks that once we agree on, we can start building a strategy based on that.
I like the last thing that you said as well, is that once we agree upon that, so there's got to be a collaborative approach, when you approach any of these things, to agree on the fundamentals. And then I love the funnel too. You're absolutely right that you start with the big picture and those building blocks, those fundamentals, and ultimately you're going to get to how does it fulfill a need that a customer has. Ultimately,
1,000%. I think that, and I think that point of agreement and collaboration, that's what makes marketing so enjoyable to me. Because in engineering, the fundamentals are really beyond question, right? It's something you can just go test. But in marketing, the fundamentals are always about interpretations, right? Like, if you're talking to someone, is their motivation here this or that? How urgent is this problem for them? How much value are they actually getting from this? And so many times in marketing, it's about how you frame something, right? So I guess that's part of the enjoyment, is that collaborative spirit that you really won't find in a space in engineering where it's really just dry and, these are the basics and that's how you get by it.
Yeah.
So 1,000%. And I guess that's why I do what I do. It's because of that, because I like the ambiguity and the sense of you're not going to find the answer, stuck in a room with your laptop. You're going to find the answer by communicating with other people, talking with them, and together you're going to come to that solution. And that's a big motivator for me to like show up to work every day.
Yeah.
So tie that, where one of the things we've been talking about, tie that to how you take the unstructured and then align it with the ideal customer profile. What kind of process do you go through?
So for me, the way I do it is, I think it's my thought process. Like, I'll try to take in as much information as possible and it will balloon. But at some point, I'll feel like the vision starts getting clear and everything starts just whittling down for me. What I'll do is I want to be very clear. Like, I always start from the customer. What job are they trying to get done? Like the jobs to be done framework, which was espoused by Clayton Christensen. I think that's gorgeous, right? And then I also feel that once you have a clear idea of the persona, if you're doing B2B, which is where I focus, you want to be clear on the stakeholders involved and the roles in the purchasing process, right? Like the buying center. Who are the people? What are their powers? What are their interests? So on and so forth. Once you, again, and once you're very clear on those user elements, you also want to be thinking of the competition. How does the competitions or the substitutes as well? Like, again, it's a lot of that. Now, once I've understood all this, at some point I have to look at the company. Like once I've looked at the customer and the environment, the last person I'll look at is the company itself that I'm serving, in the sense of, all right, what are your brand values? What are you trying to stand for? What are your differentiators? All that. And once I have like those three pieces, so the customer, the market, and the company I serve, then it becomes easy for me to come up with a strategy that really builds on that. So for instance, if let's say the competition is creating generic content that is watered down a bit, then maybe we need to go deep dive and create really strong content based on interviews with subject matter experts. If everybody is doing written content, then let's see if we can do video and distribute it on channels where the competition isn't there. But again, none of this matters so long as I don't know what once I know what the customer wants and what they need to learn, that's one thing, right? So the process, to recap, because I know I said a lot, is first I start with the customers. I understand their journey, their considerations, their concerns, what jobs they're trying to get done in their lives, their motivations, all that. And you do that whether through voice of customer data, you do it through sort of conversations with the sales team, with the support team. You try to get as much as a holistic picture of the customer's life as you can. And then once you talk to as many customers as you possibly can, you look at the competition, the market, what is everybody else doing, what are the substitutes? In other words, sometimes the competition isn't just the people who sell directly the same thing you sell. Sometimes it's like, if I'm selling Pepsi, maybe I'm competing with someone selling orange juice. So you have to be aware of that. And finally, you land sort of at the customer, their brand, their values, and everything else. And here it becomes a conversation. So for instance, a lot of times I'll talk with the brand or the company, and I'll feel that they don't have a strong, clear sense of their identity. In other words, it's like, I ask them, if your brand were a personality, if your company were a human being, describe them to me. Better yet, if I were to give you a set of companies, right, like Nike, Apple, Tesla, like all these big brand names, which do you feel your company's personality most aligns with? And the objective here for me is to understand if there's going to be a voice, a tone. How do we cater that? And this is where I feel like a tool such as like brand archetypes helps, right? Like once you understand your brand archetype, you can really tailor the voice to that. And again, like I feel that makes it easier for you to have consistent content and just stay on brand all the time, because you know your brand's personality. So for me, I feel that that's another way to bring it home. But again, you always have to start with the customer.
You had done some writing on the brand archetype, and I think you said it was one of your more popular posts on LinkedIn.
My content strategy, so there are two posts that I like. My brand archetype was a bit too long, but I kind of got into the weeds on that one. The content strategy was really successful because I talked about different content strategies, but I tied them to your brand archetype. In other words, there always has to be a match between your personality and the content strategy you adopt. So for instance, if your brand archetype is the sage, it's the wise, smart brand, then you can follow the analytical content strategy. The analytical content strategy is basically the company that pores over, let's say, all its data, all its sort of worksheets, whatever it can, and tries to derive as many insights from those numbers and from all the information it has available to it, and then offer this proprietary information to the public or to its audience. So with that formula, that makes sense with the sage. But on the other hand, let's say if you're the caretaker sort of, or the caregiver, sorry, archetype, then it makes much more sense to sort of focus on testimonials and case studies that are much, and that doesn't mean that one archetype can't do the other, but each strategy matches best. Again, you could try different mixes and matches, but like for instance, one of the exhausting strategies that you could try is the one that Gary Vee follows, right? He's everywhere all the time, right? And you have people like Alex Hormozy and all those people, they do that. But for me to be omnipresent like that on all platforms, the best archetype that will work is what I would argue is the hero archetype, because the hero by definition is some person who's like pushing themselves, they're the hard workers. And that's how Gary Vee always markets himself. That's how Alex Hormozy markets himself. Like, I'm everywhere all the time. But if the sage were to do that, the sage is known for having very valuable insights. So I would argue if a company wants to be known as the thought leader, then I'd argue, what are you trying to do? Are you the hardest worker in your space? Or are you the most knowledgeable person in your space? The hardest worker is everywhere all the time. The most knowledgeable person doesn't have to speak all the time, but when they speak, it's gold. So understanding that distinction, understanding what your audience expects of you, and what is your differentiator. In other words, do your customers expect you to sort of be the most hardworking person and that's it? Or do they go to you because this is a very nascent space that you're operating in? There's a lot of confusion and they want to hear a voice that is just, wise, that understands its space and that's able to offer that balance. And again, that's why understanding the customers, part of that triangle is super important. But then once you understand that, it becomes easy to choose an archetype that fits, I guess. So, yeah.
Really interesting.
Interesting, yeah.
Did you have something, Sarah? I'm sorry, I didn't.
Yeah, no, just that. Yeah, I'm familiar with the brand archetypes, but I never thought to put to map it to the type of content that you put out. That's really interesting. Again,
to me, it's not necessarily something that's woven into stone, written in stone. I'm sorry. It's more something of a conversation. In other words, this is how I perceive it. And part of having that opinion is, if you feel differently, all right, why do you feel differently? Let's have that conversation. In other words, because it's collaborative, it's an invitation to sort of say, well, actually, I believe I can be the hero. Sorry, I can be the sage, but I can still be omnipresent on all channels. All right, let's see how we can do both. How can we manage the archetype and not sacrifice the quality of our content and still make sure that every insight we share is golden? And that becomes a conversation in the sense of, how do we operationally do that? How do we not burn out while doing that? How do we and why do we feel that being the sage makes sense? Because if every other company in your space is the sage, then you're not differentiating yourself. You're still the same personality. So choosing the archetype also is a big function of, what is everybody else doing and how do we differentiate ourselves? But yeah, again, like, just because these are like simple guidelines or simple thoughts that you could have on the space, the best work is when you challenge these thoughts and are like, I know the sage should do this or that, but why not try it this way? And then you try to make it work, and you can try, maybe it won't work, maybe it will, but through that iterative process.
So these are models, and you work with a client to dig in and find out what their unique perspective is, and you can try on different ones. And it's not that you're 100% sage. You can be a sage and another archetype, and bring the two elements together to find that voice.
1,010%. I think it's a conversation. I think it's always, but for me, and this goes back to the point of fundamentals. The point is, anytime you make a suggestion, you have to be able to argue why. And that's the thing, is because when you're saying why you believe something is, you're highlighting your underlying assumptions. And that's what you're testing as a marketer every time. So when I'm saying, I think we'd be a sage, the first thing Keith should ask is, why do you want to be a sage? I'll say, well, I think our audience needs the comfort of seeing us as being very knowledgeable. So now that's the underlying assumption we're testing, right? So when I say, for instance, ABC or anything for a client, I always am already thought through why this makes sense to me. And that becomes sort of the first principle or the building block that I'm trying to agree with, right? Like, do we agree on this assumption, or do we feel this is something we should test first?
I think, I have to ask a sales question.
Go ahead, please.
But as we know, sales and marketing are intertwined. So, we should be working together collaboratively on creating an ICP and how to approach the market and what can marketing provide, what can sales do, et cetera. But, when it comes to the need itself, what are the customer's needs? You start with the customer, just like you mentioned, which is perfect. And you come to a set of understanding what they need, and then do I have something to fulfill that need? That's, the basic premise of it. But oftentimes, especially in startups or my background's in medical devices, so new medical devices, for instance, you can meet those needs, but you even have things that create more value than just meeting the need. But that's the tough part, is creating the need, not just identifying the need, but trying to create the need that fulfills something even greater than what is the standard. Does that make sense?
I want to recap what you're saying to make sure I
Yes.
understand. And if I understood correctly, then I think I'm already like the answer is in my head a bit. What you're arguing for is that it's not just important to uncover the need, but
Yes.
sometimes when you dig in with the customer, there are needs that they're unaware of
Yes.
that tack on to the need they already know. Like I know, for instance, I need to improve my SEO, but I
Yes.
don't realize that my content can serve sales enablement as well. So when you sort of talk with them, it's like, why aren't you creating content that sort of drives that line in between where it's improving your SEO efforts, but you can also share it with your sales team, improving your sales enablement,
Yes.
and that becomes more valuable. This is what you're trying to argue for, right?
You're exactly right.
Great
I
example.
think that's perfectly put, but I think the issue here is contingent, right? Because the way I think of it is, you could look at like, and Tom, I think you're gonna know this better than me. There's a book called The Challenger Sale, I believe.
Yeah.
It's about how to sort of like they talked about the 5 different types of salespeople, right? And the most important types that are relevant for the conversation are relational and challengers. Challengers, they push against anybody's. They don't push against anybody's opinion. They push against that sense of status quo, and they're like, why aren't you doing this? How can we change this for the better? They're trying to offer insights, and they are always trying to not be they're not debating so much as they're pushing against something.
Yes.
So to your point, I think content needs to help them, but it all comes from the company, right? So the company could say, for instance, we believe our unique perspective, the thing that nobody else is doing in the market, and I want to use that example, is people are focusing on content for SEO rather than content for sales enablement and so on and so on and so on, right? So our unique perspective is we're going to walk into the market and say we want to do this, this, that. And the discovery call starts with that. Like on the sales end, the discovery call is, how is content serving your sales team, and so on and so forth. So once that is all sort of lined up, and once the company and the marketing team and the sales team, they all align on that, they test that hypothesis. The sales team tries to sell that way, and the content team creates content that caters to that. So for instance, if I'm writing a piece, I'm not going to just write a piece about how your SEO is bringing in traffic. I'll write about how a content piece helped a sales team increase their numbers from quarter to quarter, and we can track that. How, for instance, another content piece about how the success team was able to increase the customer's retention or success through the roof by using this.
Yeah.
In other words, it's a collaborative effort, and I think like staying in theme of the entire show here, it is a band's job to sort of all work in sync and harmony together. And the same thing goes for like marketing, whether it's content, sales, everybody else, in the sense of, for a company to really differentiate itself and be truly distinguished in its space, what's the one hypothesis it believes in that it needs to test, and that it's willing to have its entire sort of band push into the market? The issue that I see a lot of times is that companies are scared to try a hypothesis. They'll just do what the rest of the market is doing. So we're not going to sell content across the board. We're just going to sell SEO. And what ends up happening, because you're not doing that, you're not differentiating yourself. You're still very much playing the same tune that everybody else is playing. So, and that's why a lot of people don't realize those other needs. Like the needs that they realize, that's the needs that everybody in the market is hammering. Everybody's talking about SEO and everybody's talking about whatever, right? But you're the one person who's differentiated in the sense of, I realize that there are other needs you're not seeing right now, but because I'm different than everybody else, I'm not just showing you have these needs, I'm tying them to this already existed foundation that you are aware of. And once that as a company is like solidified, because that's what makes us different, the content team, the sales team, the success team, the support team, they're all sort of marching the same tune, maybe. I think that would really be such a successful sort of endeavor. 100%.
So you just described the ideal scenario within a company, for sure. And you know, we joke about smarketing and working together in sales and marketing, but the truth is, it's every function within the company. You know, everyone needs to know, what are we? Are we the challengers? Are we the ones that are going to differentiate ourselves versus, you know, the bar that's set right now? R&D, finance, legal, you name it. Everyone has to work together with the same mission in mind. So I agree with you 100%.
1,000%. I think that's completely on point.
So we in marketing and sales, we have all these models, but you know what really makes these initiatives work is when the CEO and the leadership of the company get behind having a content strategy. Talk a little bit about your experience in working with teams, like they're ready to go. They understand the value of content and they're willing to put the resources behind it. Where do you start? Right now, you're in the ideal client for doing your job. You don't have to educate people about these models, right? They understand the value. You've got the perfect customer. How do you get started? What do you do?
I think it's going to be different every time. Like, I don't think I've ever walked into this, like different and they're the same thing. But I'll say this much: I think that when you're talking to different stakeholders, each one wants something different. So, for instance, the CEO is thinking of the ROI, the CMO is thinking of maintaining the brand and making sure that the content stays on brand. The sales team is thinking about sort of lower funnel content that will serve them. So the first thing that I would do is, like, again, thinking of it, I need for my own benefit to understand the customer being served, understand like the triangle we talked about early on, right? But what I'll also do, like the next step, once I've sort of really understood this part, is look at the company itself. What does it need, right? Like, what are the biggest gaps right now? Do they have a significant gap in lower funnel content? So, for instance, the sales team needs more enablement, and maybe they need more training documents that would help them. Then maybe I need to create content that straddles that line. You can post it on your blog, and you can use it as lower funnel content to help the sales team close better. Are they having a problem with retention, right? So then can we help with that? Like, are the customers struggling to use the product? So maybe if we were to write a piece or two to sort of show the power of the product. Like, for instance, a lot of products, you only get the benefit after, like for instance, Twitter, I think it wasn't until you had like 30, you weren't following 30 people, something along those lines. I might be off. But it wasn't until you reach a certain benchmark that you really started getting benefit from it and it became sticky. A lot of products are like that inside. Like, for instance, you're not going to use a social platform a lot unless you have unless you're connected to several people on that platform. So how do you get people to that point? Product managers and growth teams will spend a lot of time sort of figuring it out, but a lot of times just content. In other words, you sort of show the benefit. You can show case studies of other people who've done that, maybe videos of people enjoying that platform together. So, for instance, something like Twitch expanded greatly because a lot of times they'll redistribute the content to something like YouTube. TikTok also exists on Instagram. So both platforms sort of really feed off each other. It's very hard to find one video without finding it on the other platform. But back to your question, I think what I'll do is just I need to find the gaps and the weaknesses and the strategy. In other words, what's the CMO's or the head of marketing's objective for this quarter? Are they trying to increase their leads, or are they trying to help the conversions? What about the head of sales? Are they aligned? Does the head of sales sort of feel that the objective the marketing team has doesn't make sense? You have to be clear on all these objectives. And part of the reason it's different is because usually different companies will have different objectives, right? So, for instance, one company will be launching a new product and they want to start creating content quickly for it so that they can generate interest. Another company is sort of they want to sort of create they have a service page or a lead generation page, and they want to drive traffic to that. So depending on where the company is, its level of maturity, and also depending on its customers. In other words, like, customers can be in one of three situations, right? They can either be in a new purchase situation, They could be in a modified rebuy or just a straight rebuy. Meaning, new purchases, they're buying something for the first time, right? You're buying your first car, you're buying your first, SaaS product, whatever it is. But the problem here is that you don't know, you're not sure how this works. There's a lot of risk involved, and you haven't sort of like written down your evaluative criteria to make this work. Now, the second one is a modified rebuy. Means you've bought something several times over. You're not 100% certain that you're happy with your current vendor, like you want to change cars, whatever, but you already know what to expect. You're aware of the product, like you're familiar. And then a straight rebuy is you're just buying from the existing customer. But the thing is, depending on each one, this person has like this new buy, no product awareness. The modified rebuy, a lot of product awareness. And the straight rebuy, they don't like they memorize sort of like the product specs that they get from the vendor. So depending on where your customer lands, that's a very different content strategy. Because if you cater to only people who are doing new purchases from you, then a lot of the effort you're doing is just generating product awareness and educating your customers. But if you're doing this part, which is simply a modified rebuy, then a lot of the effort is how are we different? What distinguishes us from the competition? And it's a very different conversation.
So you're bringing it back to where we started, right? Which is the engineering and the solution engineering that is required. And what I think those of us in this industry, I'll speak for myself, is the love of that problem solving and the creative product, right? And
100%.
when I met you, I really understood you do this innately, and I'm really glad that we were able to kind of pull that out of you today and how you approach this, because it's
100%.
very valuable.
It is. And I think it's fun. Again, like you mentioned, it's fitting a puzzle, right? So I think there's a lot of fun there.
That's it.
Yeah.
So before we go, our favorite part of the show is the after hours work, and we dive in through the lens of rock and roll, and we've had this is a second international show that we've had. So one of the things that's really interesting is that cultural exchange that rock and roll and music, all kinds of music, as we talked about earlier. Tell us a little bit about your musical journey, what you like, and how you see it from a cultural perspective.
So for me, I feel I've always felt like I'm a child of two worlds, right? Like I was born in the States, but then we came back to Cairo when I was like 10. So like I've always enjoyed sort of Western sort of pop culture in general, including music. But whether it's like for specifically for music, when it comes, I don't think I'd have a favorite band, but I'd say like I listen to different, like for instance, I was just mentioning earlier, the song that's been stuck in my head is "In the Meantime" by Space Hawk, right? And that song is just like it's an earworm for me. And I'm the kind of person, once something gets stuck, I just end up listening for a couple of days to just that song, maybe into something else. But yeah, like I think I've been lucky enough to have a couple of friends who are really into music. Like one of my friends is very into classical music, right? And he back in college would drag me to the opera with him. And then like I think for me also part of what makes music interesting is it's a very communal experience. In other words, there's that energy like when you're in a concert or when you're just at a jazz bar or anything, and you're all tuned in and you're all just listening to the music together, sharing that experience. I think there's something beautiful about that. So I also remember mentioning that there's something called Zor. It's an Arabic sort of music. It's very ritualistic. I'm not aware of what the rituals mean. I don't really understand it. I just attended a couple of them, and it's very percussion based, but I thought it was very interesting. So yeah,
Interesting.
yeah. But
Do you get many North American or European acts? I know there's a big leap. You know, it's very easy for North Americans and Europeans to exchange culture. What's it like with the Middle East and Egypt in your experience in that cultural exchange?
So I think there are two things. First of all, you find a lot of bands coming over. I think what was his name? Like I think there was someone who was just playing at the Pyramids maybe a week ago. I could look up his name right now. I just don't remember who he is. But I think also what's interesting to see a lot of times is a lot of Egyptian or Middle Eastern bands getting very influenced by that style. So, for instance, you have bands like Kairoki. Uh, uh, I'm really trying to like go through my head right now because I'm drawing blanks. But the thing is, I know like once this is over, I'll just like start rattling off all the other bands that I know that just are into that space. But a lot of the fun is like even sometimes you'll find like they'll adopt the pop cultural sort of I won't say tunes, but like vibes that a song that the Western songs would have. So I'd say there's a lot of influence there. But then on the other hand, like you find a lot of songs that transfer. So for instance, someone who usually samples, I think the word is sample, I'm not sure.
Mhm.
Arabic music is Leonard Cohen. So Leonard Cohen, he has
Yeah.
that song, the one that
Oh.
they played on True Detective. I don't remember the name.
Oh,
You know what you know the one I mean though, right?
Is it
All right, let me
Hallelujah.
no.
Leonard
True
Cohen.
Detective. I'll tell you the song right now because there's Never Mind.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So if you were listening to that song, there's a piece that's complete, that's all in Arabic, right? And like it's part of my favorite part of the song. But like I mean, a lot of times you'll see that go in, right? And then like for instance, Moon Knight. If you guys have seen the Marvel series, there are like a lot because it's sort of done by an Egyptian director and it's a lot of shot in Egypt. So you'll find like a lot of Egyptian music, but then that music is westernized. So for instance, there's a song called Batwan Speak, but the one we hear at the end of the second episode, it's not actually the original Batwan Speak. I think it's by Warda, I'm not sure. But it's actually a remix of sorts that's sort of more guitar based, I think. I'm not sure. So yeah, my what I think is it's really interesting always to see how they travel because the styles can be very different, and it's always enjoyable. Yeah, it's fun.
All right.
We well, what I've started doing now when we write the blogs is we put links to the YouTube videos as well. So
Oh,
we'll share some.
I could give you so many more. If you want, let me give you a couple. Right. So Mika, I think it's Mika. Mika did a collaboration with with Mashroua Layla. All right, it's called Mika Promised Land. So just Mika, Mashroua Layla, Promised Land. So hear the original, the Promised Land, that's the original one, and then hear that collaboration between the both of them. And like that's something that I enjoy doing. Like I'll sit with my brother, we'll listen to let's say two versions of the same song, and we'll compare them, right? And
Neat.
that is one where we both enjoyed the updated version, the one with Mashroua Layla, over the original one. God, I could keep doing this forever. All right, give me a second. Let me go through my music list. But when this week, God, I don't remember ever. Look, problem is that because Space Hog has been sort of like hogging up my space right now. So I really am drawing blanks when it comes to sort of like. So obviously there are big names, but I don't know if they'd be rock and roll like Amr Diab. No. So Mashroua Layla, Kairuki. All right. Really drawing blank here, guys. Kairoki. All right. Ooh, Abdul Qadir. Abdul Qadir is a good one. Wait. No.
This is so cool.
But
I
the thing is
think
because yeah,
I
go ahead.
think of what you're like as you're going through these collaborations. I think of like Paul Simon
Okay.
and how he worked with other
Mm.
musicians in other countries. Peter Gabriel.
Yeah, I love Peter Gabriel. Big fan of him, man. If you want a really good song, it's all Arabic, but I love it. It's
Yeah.
by Kairoki called Abdul Qadir. So it's a remix of an original song, and there is a solo guitar in there that's incredible. It's gorgeous.
Cool.
Yeah, I highly recommend it. So Abdul Qadir by Kairoki Abdul Qadir.
So you got to send me a link to that, and we'll include it
Okay.
in the show notes. And you know what was so cool? Your whole body language changed when you talked about guitar.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right?
Because so good. I remember it. Because I remember that song specifically. What happened was I was on a road trip with a friend of mine and he introduced me to that. And the minute that guitar solo hit, I was like, oh, whoa.
Right.
That was fun. So yeah, I remember that. I actually I have the video. I listen to it every once in a while. I'm really trying to remember other sort of interesting songs that I feel would fit the conversation.
Well, the fascinating thing about these interviews that we've done is when people do just what you did, right? We switch from talking business and all the serious stuff, and we get to music, and all of a sudden memories come back, right? And you start telling the stories from that time. So we do this show because we say that Tom and I met. He's a sales guy. I'm a marketing guy, and our first show that we saw was for both of us was Boston 40 years ago. And we were in two different cities. We were, roughly the same age, and we saw the same band. Then we met for coffee. Fast forward to 2023, and that came out. We both love music. Well, all of a sudden we started talking about, well, sales and marketing needs to work together like a band. And the idea of taking creative product and building an audience and turning that into a commercial enterprise, that's what we're all trying to do, right? You're doing it with content.
1,000. And I think the difference is when you're talking about business, it's a very analytical conversation, right? You're being very matter of fact. You're thinking about, I want to do this, that. And I think for me, the best part of a business is having a clear vision. Once everything gets unscrambled and I see the way ahead, 100%. But when you talk about music, it's such an emotional component because it's not just that the music can stir the emotions. It's the people you were with while you were experiencing them. It's the story that got you there. All those little details. It's the people you met while you were there, right? Maybe you met your current girlfriend or your wife or, whatever. Right. So all these things are so different in the sense of it's no longer that analytical part of you. It's such an emotional component that makes, the whole experience richer. So, yeah, 1,000%.
Now, the challenge for, I think, businesses and what we're trying to dig into here on this show is, well, that's what businesses need to do now, right? Even though you're selling a widget, right? I mean, at one extreme in the rock and roll metaphor, you're selling a seat, right? You put your butt in it.
I get it.
But
no, I get it 100%.
So now what the creative work that you do as a writer, you were talking about all of those elements that go in through the challenger, right? Do you want to create some conflict that creates emotion that can trigger a buy?
I think it's not just about that. I think so. Two things. On the one hand, I think if you work and there's a meaning to what you do, in other words, you feel that there's what you do is meaningful in some way, I think that makes it way more emotional. And I think everybody needs to feel not just that there's meaning in their work, but that it's progressing their life in some way. And I'm not talking monetary wise. In other words, I've seen the impact personally between having a mentor or a boss who cares about my growth and one who just expects me to hand in a sheet or a piece of content or whatever, right? And the difference is night and day. One of them, I take a bullet. The other person, I don't even know where they are on the planet right now. So that's one. The second thing that I also say is it's not just for me emotion. We want to trust people who are willing to have an opinion. In other words, it's scary to have an opinion because you're going to ostracize some people and you're going to, exclude them. But the power of having an opinion is that if you can argue and fight for that opinion, other people are going to be like, actually, I think you're making a good point. Let's see where this vision will take us. So I think finding meaning and having something that you believe in and hey, I believe in this because of 1, 2, 3, I think that makes it more emotional. And then when you argue with someone and push for it, it sort of becomes, okay, this is not someone who's just trying to sell me something. They're really trying to enact some change that they think makes sense to me. So I think that is something important.
We had a guest on a few weeks ago, Kevin Perlmutter, and he talked about similar to what you're bringing into the conversation. And that's, if you're I think his example was software for supply chain management, right? Well, what that really does is you're buying confidence that your product's going to be here. Your job is safe because that software is going to help you. You can write forever about confidence and reliability rather than the speeds and feeds of the software.
I think there's a lot of truth in that, but I think also it's not enough just 100%. I think making people feel confident and the system is reliable, that is super important. But I want to go back to the point of like a lot of times there are unaddressed needs. If you really have that differentiating point, share the insights, show how those unaddressed needs tie into the needs that they're already aware of and how you can solve all of them with a simple solution,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And once you do that, I think that becomes the opinion that challenges them. That's the thing that becomes meaningful, because now you're enacting that kind of change, the change that you believe. Like for me, I believe content is not about SEO. Content is about communicating with your audience. So it's about understanding where they are, the channels they use, all that. I believe it's about being an educator and about sort of like trying to realize that people will trust you if you're honest with them. So for instance, one of the things that I struggle with sometimes is like I'll recommend a piece to my client and they won't want to do it. For instance, I'll tell them you should write about the top 10 X in your space. And for me, it's about giving the audience the best information possible. Like give them what they need. But then my client will shirk away. It's like, I don't want to talk about my competition. It's like, they already know your competition exists. But talk honestly. Talk about where your strengths and weaknesses are, what their strengths and weaknesses are. And that will make you way more trustworthy than trying to sort of, hide information that they already have access to. And I've had that conversation, like even at Zyda, I wanted to sort of share that information. And we had that piece created. And it's in there. Like, I don't know if they publish it yet or not. But for me, being willing to have an opinion, and even if a lot of people aren't okay with it, that matters. That makes people feel like it gives people the freedom to talk a lot and to express themselves.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Well, this has been a fun conversation. I could go on and on forever.
Yeah.
We're already
100%.
over.
The thing is, this is fun for me. And like the minute you turned it to music, I was like, oh, okay. Like I perked up. And right now, the after effect is I'm still thinking of songs I want to recommend. But like when we switched back to business, so I just like that switch flipped off, and it's so easy to turn back on right now.
Keith will post them.
Yeah, I'll send you Abdul I'll send you the link to that one.
We will. We've developed a whole set of AI algorithms and also a supply chain of people. And between those two, we've been able to take an interview like this and turn it in. The first stage is a transcript. The second stage is a set of fodder that can be 40 or 50 pages long. And then that gets fed into a model that we have, and we start to create first drafts of content. And we've squeezed hours and hours out of time on that, and we call it the podcast ecosystem. So we're gonna be able to demo that to you. We're gonna take this 47-minute interview and turn it into some good stuff, and we look forward to sharing it with you.
I'm excited to see all of it, and I'm sure it's going to be amazing. It's super cool. I love it, guys.
I've got to stick with rock and roll just for a second before we sign off. And I don't think we've done this before, but this time next week, I'll be in Vegas to see 3 shows at the Sphere, which I'm very, very excited about. And the band is called Dead and Company, and it's sort of a morph of the Grateful Dead. The reason I bring that up is, one, because it's rock and roll, and I'm really excited about it. But 2, there's a book written. It's called Marketing Lessons from the Grateful Dead. And it's actually fascinating. Talk about differentiating. It's amazing that the story behind it and all the marketing lessons that come from it, because you talk about a unique band that has a unique following. That's certainly a representation of that as well. So I'll leave you with this quote from Jerry Garcia that's in the book. He was one of the musicians in the band. And it's not enough to be number one. You want to do what no one else has never done.
Oh, I love that. Ooh, that's nice.
Talk about
That really stretches your mind to think at the most highest level.
I love that. Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, that's really good. I like it. Yeah, 1000%. That's beautiful. Nice.
So
well, I'm actually broadcasting here from Phoenix because I saw the Rolling Stones 2 days ago in Phoenix, and there's another marketing powerhouse in the Rolling Stones. Tom, thank you for bringing it home on that. That's one of our cores is the rock and roll piece. And Ibrahim, you've been a great guest to have. And Sarah, thank you for participating and helping us get this all moving. And we'll see everybody next week.
All right. And thank you guys for having me. This has been a delight, truly.
Thank
so
you,
much.
Ibrahim. Really
Take-
appreciate it.
I'm
Take care.
so
All right,
grateful. Thank you.
everybody,
All
make it a great day.
All right.
Have a good one.